So I have the pleasure in this closing plenary to introduce Andrew Bowman. Some of you know that one of my hats is I'm on the board of the Land Trust Alliance in the US, and I currently chair that board. So I've had the great pleasure of working with Andrew very closely over the last couple years. He came to the Land Trust Alliance just about exactly 2 years ago as president. He came after 10 years leading the environment program at the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, which is a major philanthropic organization based in the US. He actually has 2 master's degrees, one in city and regional planning and one in environment and natural resources, and he has a JD degree, which means he's a lawyer. Yes, he's a lawyer. So he's obviously a person of great breadth of knowledge across our fields. He's from California, so I think he's been really enjoying this Chilean Mediterranean climate and doesn't really want to get back on a plane to Washington, D.C., but he has to, so he's going to be closing for us tonight, and it really is my very great pleasure to introduce one of the great conservation leaders in the U.S., my friend Andrew Bowman.
Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you, Laura, so much for those kind remarks. This thing does that a lot, does it not? I'm going to try to be careful with that. Before I start, actually, I know we're going to do some thank yous in a minute, but I want to make sure that Jim Levitt, Laura Johnson, and Emily Myron get the credit they deserve for everything they've done to bring this together. So. It's been a great Congress, and I know how much work goes into this, so thank you for all that you've done. So I'm flattered to have this opportunity to talk to you at the end of the Congress. What I'd like to do today is just reflect a little bit on what's happened over the last 3 days, and I hope to give you some inspiration, some inspiring words to take with you as you go back and advance private land conservation around the world. So I want to start with a number to begin that inspiration, and that's 56 million acres. That is the cumulative amount as of the end of 2015 that American land trusts have conserved in the United States. To give you some perspective, that's more than twice the size of national park holdings in the lower 48 states in the US. It's a truly amazing accomplishment. Now, they've done this with quite a few supporters, but it's still a relatively small operation. They've got about 8,000 staff, full and part-time staff, about 16,000 board members, over 200,000 other active volunteers, which is very impressive. And overall, our estimate is about 4.6 million people in the US are somehow associated with the land trust, providing support, et cetera. And it's not only the amount or the number of acres that they're protecting, but they're finding ways to serve their communities. For instance, 72% of the land owned by land trust that's open to the public, it's open for public access, and over 6 million people visited in 2015 alone. And I bring all this up not just to crow about the American Land Trust community or the alliance which is associated with it, but to show that in many ways this is a community that's been around 40 years, maybe a little longer depending on the entity. The Land Trust Alliance, this is our 36th year. It's not a really long time if you think about it. And look at how much was accomplished by this community growing and coming together. And we like to think at the Alliance that we've played some role in that. And let me just talk briefly about what we do at the Land Trust Alliance. And again, I bring this up not so much to crow about what we do, but to give you a feel for the constellation of activities that we have found that's been really effective in helping private land conservation organizations excel and do really great work. The first is we're all about capacity building. We actually set what we call land trust standards and practices. These are the regulations, if you will, that we set for our community, but the community helps develop those. Together we say we're going to live by these technical and ethical standards for land trusts. So we educate land trusts about those standards, we train them, we help them become the organizations they need to be to really fully implement those standards. We have an accreditation system where we give a seal of approval to those land trusts that can demonstrate that they've actually complied with most of the standards and practices. And we even have our own insurance company that's essentially owned by our members, and that gives them litigation coverage and other types of coverage if they need to go out and defend the type of lands that they've protected. If they need to say, this has a conservation easement, this has restrictions, and we're going to go to court to make sure those are enforced. We're all about advocacy, and I think this is a big point I wanted to make today, is you need a united voice, if possible, to advocate for your community. And the Land Trust Alliance does that for our family of land trusts. And I should note, we have about 1,000 land trust members. We represent those land trusts in Congress. We represent them in court, especially tax court cases, because so much of what happens in the US for land conservation is driven by federal tax incentives. But we're also increasingly in the court of public opinion. I won't get into gory details now, but unfortunately, there can be controversy around private land conservation. And groups like ours step up and try to make the arguments in the court of public opinion. Of course, we bring people together. We have a national conference called Rally, where we bring everyone together once a year. And we otherwise engage in what we call collaborative leadership. And what we mean by that is that we bring our community together to identify risks, opportunities, things that we need to figure out. Together, we set that path forward and we implement. And I want to note today that ILCN is clearly doing the latter two of these. I mean, the convening and the collaborative leadership. And I felt that so much the last few days. That's what this group is doing. This group is getting together saying, okay, what do we need to figure out to bring private land conservation to another level around the globe? Now, at the Alliance, we're just wrapping up a strategic planning process. And in fact, I'm hoping, praying the next week that our board adopts the new strategic plan. And as part of that process, we've done a lot of introspection. We've talked and thought about what is it about our work that we want to continue? What is it about our work that's allowed us to be successful? And I'm going to go through a list now of what we sort of figured out, and I've seen it in the last few days, and that's what I want to emphasize. The same characteristics I'm about to go through apply to our work in the US and your work around the world. And what I'm trying to get at here is it's the nature of our work. That's the reason we're poised for such success. First of all, we're all about local work. We're all about finding people at the local level that can bring people together and build the excitement and the passion to protect places. We're all community-based. I've heard so many times over the last few days about we need to make sure that all these different constituencies are served as we go about doing our work. It's not just about serving the landowner that wants to protect the land or our own organizations. It's about the people in the community and how can we make sure they get what they need. Perhaps one of the most important things about our work is it's voluntary. These are landowners saying, I want to do the right thing. This isn't government regulation. This isn't someone coercing someone to do land conservation. And it gets to the next item on the list. There's so much charitable intent with our work. Think of all the people you've worked with where they gave up an asset or interest in their land, and there's no way they got back the dollar amount that that's worth. These are people who want to do the right thing and they're willing to give up wealth and privilege. Our work is nonpartisan, and in the US especially right now, I can tell you this is critical, and the Alliance has always been very good about this. We have people on the right and on the left that truly embrace land conservation, and you can do that too across the world. And the reason is because love of land is universal. Everybody has a special place that they want to talk about, whether it's from their childhood, it reminds them of home. My view is that people come to associate their core values with particular locations. And so you can strike up a conversation with almost anybody, regardless of political stripe, about land and why they love it. And of course, the enduring nature of our work is, it's not unique per se, but it's rare. We have the audacity to talk about perpetuity and forever. And people like that, and people are attracted to it. So for all these types of reasons, land conservation on the private side has been very successful in the US. It can be very successful for you also around the world. Now, as part of our strategic planning process, of course, we had to come up with our goals, our conservation goals over the next few years. And I thought I'd share these with you because, again, I'm hearing these same things over and over again the last 3 days. I call these our 4 R's. Maybe you'll find this useful when you go back and start articulating what you're about and what you want to accomplish. Our first goal, it's about rate. We need to conserve more land faster. There is a time value of conservation. The longer we wait, we miss out. Think of all the development pressure. Think of all the economic activity, population growth, all the things that are infringing on the lands that we need to protect. We need to do this faster and at a bigger scale. Rigor Everyone here is about rigor. That's why you're here. You want to do land conservation right. You want to do it in a professional way. You want to be able to say to private landowners and perhaps the government that might fund you that you can trust me. I bring rigor and quality to the type of practice of conservation that I do. Now, resilience is all about ensuring that conserved land endures. And I realize that resilience is sort of the word of the year. It's totally overplayed. Everyone uses it. But we're using this more and more at the Alliance. There are threats that we have to now worry about, that we have to grapple with. I used an example earlier, I'll use it again, that you could have a landowner who protects land and later sells that land to another landowner, and that new owner might say, I'm not interested in abiding by these restrictions. We need to be able to step up, and that's what we've helped our land trust do, to step up and actually go to court if necessary and say, no, that land is permanently protected. We have to think about things like climate change now, and we had a great session yesterday on this. Climate change is it's happening faster than we thought. There seems to be an inexorable increase in the concentration of greenhouse gases. We thought it was leveling off, but it's not. We know that climate change is here, it's real, it's a profound threat to our work, and we all need to figure out how to be resilient to it. And then this fourth goal, relevance, which is about elevating land conservation as a priority for many more people. This is what's new for us at the Alliance. In the past, we have focused a lot on these first three goals, but we're really taking on the relevance piece now. And why is that? Well, notwithstanding the fact that I showed that almost 5 million people have some association with land trusts in the US, that is a small sliver of our population. It's also a pretty uniform sliver in terms of demographics and wealth. We need far more people in the US and around the world to be passionate about land and land conservation. We need them to want to help us increase the rate of land conservation, for instance. What I've learned since I've been on the job the last 2 years more than ever is we have to figure out how to communicate better how our work benefits people. How does it satisfy their needs? Now, I came into this field and I heard this again the last few days. How many people here say, I do this work because I believe in the intrinsic value of nature and wildlife. That's why so many of us got into this field. And that's still completely legitimate. But what I'm arguing here is we have to find a way to communicate and market in a different way. We have to be able to say to people, you have needs, you have wants, and land conservation can satisfy those. Think about talking about clean water, or where food and fiber comes from, or the need to have open spaces where young people can go and develop into healthy human beings. We have to find ways of being very practical like that so that people can say, as I try to say more and more, that land is the answer to so many of the challenges that we face. Now, what I want to do for the rest of my presentation today is focus on one particular way that I think we can show this relevance. And you won't be surprised, those of you who saw me doing the climate change session yesterday, it is about climate change. What I want to talk about here are natural climate solutions. This is all about the ability of land, soils, vegetation to absorb and store carbon. We're talking about a number of things here. We're talking about avoided conversion, keeping intact landscapes in place. We're talking about improved land management, especially around agricultural lands. And we're talking about restoration at a massive scale. We're also talking about work that's across all major biomes, so forests, again, grasslands and agriculture and wetlands, and at all latitudes. And what do I mean by that? Well, the science I'm about to discuss with you or bring before you, what it's showing is that you might recall that for decades now, when we've talked about the land use sector, we almost always defaulted to talking about tropical forests, and that was about it. And what the science is showing us now is that all kinds of ecosystems throughout the world in every country can be improved, can be saved, can be conserved in a way to store a tremendous amount of carbon. So let me get to the punchline, if you will. This is the key graph that I wanted to share with you. This is from a study that was led by the Nature Conservancy and that was published late last year in the Proceedings of the National Academies of Science in the US. TNC led an effort with 32 other scientists to do what I'll describe as sort of a meta-analysis. They looked at 20 different pathways for how you could store carbon in natural systems. So avoided deforestation, reforestation, better sequestration, and how you for instance, do no-till farming, things like that. So they had 20 different pathways. And they used fairly conservative estimates and assumptions. And they also did this knowing there's going to be increased human population growth and need for food. And they did this in a way where they're thinking about biodiversity and not just building or creating plantations everywhere of, say, poplar trees or whatever. So they had really good assumptions and they were conservative in what they were doing. But the goal was to be able to come back and say, if we fully embrace natural climate solutions, how far could that get us? What could it do for us? So I'm sure everyone has seen slides or graphs like this a million times. The line at the top shows historic emissions and then business as usual, where we might be headed. That blue line at the bottom shows you what emissions really need to do over time if we're going to stay below 2 degrees Celsius, which is the generally assumed goal, though 1.5 degrees would be even better if the analysis had been done that way. You'll notice also this dotted line at 2030. And what I want you to focus on is that triangle to the left of that dotted line. And what it's showing is all the emission reductions that the world needs to make to stay on a 2-degree centigrade pathway between now and 2030. And what that green shaded area is showing you is that natural climate solutions could take care of 37% of that need. That's an incredible figure. And it's the type of figure that all of us need to know about and all of us need to talk about. So I wanted to share that with you today. The other thing that I want to stress here is that there are all these co-benefits. There's all these amazing things that come with natural climate solutions. Now, we're still going to need to do all the other things for climate mitigation, renewables, energy efficiency, better transportation, you name it. But when you look at all those things, none of them come with this package of co-benefits. More food and fiber, more rural jobs and rural economies that are stronger. Climate resilience, think about all the flood protection if you restore a forest. Think about the drought protection when you increase the carbon in agricultural soils. Water security, all the clean water we'll get if we improve and restore systems. And right there in the middle of the slide, of course, is biodiversity. If we do natural climate solutions the right way, we can regreen this planet, we can bring back the abundance that we all want to see. Now, it's going to take a lot of money and a lot of resources to do that 37%, and of course we need to do this even past 2030. There are people in this room, there are funders, there are experts in this room who are thinking about that, and we had a tremendous session this morning on carbon markets. Great experts here. I can't tell you yet how we're going to find the resources or the political will to get this done, but this is what I do know. We as a community need to start talking about this. We need to help people when they think about climate change and how to mitigate it. We need them in the first 10 seconds to think about land and land conservation. Right now you have people, ask anybody, they're going to say, well, we need a lot of renewables and we're going to need a lot of energy efficiency, and maybe they'll think of a couple other things, maybe electric cars. But they're not going to say land, they're not going to talk about natural climate solutions. And so my plea to you today is help me and help all of us figure out a way to create a meme, if you will, about land and natural climate solutions. Now this next slide, I've never shown it to another living soul, literally created it yesterday, so I hope it works. This is my meme that I've come up with. So it's time to reel in climate change, and I am trademarking that. Renewables, energy efficiency, and land. This is one way of saying there's a three-legged stool. Land is one of those. And maybe that's an exaggeration, I don't know. But we have to find a way to simplify it. Now, when I was doing the slide last night, I needed some graphic for reeling in things, and I came across this image from the movie Jaws. And I don't know if people remember that movie. There's a famous line of, we're going to need a bigger boat, once they realize how big the great white shark is. And so, sure, we're going to need a bigger carbon market. And we know that, but we can figure that out. But the first step is to have people understand and assume and immediately think about natural climate solutions when they think about climate change mitigation. So that's all I have for today. I hope you find that inspiring. I hope you'll join me in trying to spread that word about natural climate solutions. I've really enjoyed my time with you the last 3 days. Thank you again for including me, and safe travels, everyone. Thanks.
Andrew, that was Fabulous. And I'm old enough to remember we're going to need a bigger boat. So that's definitely going to stay in my mind. And thank you for that call to action. I think it's a very important one, and I do hope everybody takes that message home. I know Andrew would be willing to share any of those slides, so please feel free to call on him.